Welcome to session 3. We hope that you're already finding this course useful and that you've had some really good conversations since last time.
We always find session 2 really helpful for our own marriage. I had been meaning to book that hotel for weeks and just hadn't quite got round to it. Our conversation certainly helped me realise just how much it meant to Scilla, and so I apologised to her, and next time I'll try to do it before Scilla reminds me. And I haven't told her this yet, but I did manage to book a room in that hotel you wanted to go to.
Yay! I'm really excited. That is fantastic. This session, we're going to be looking at how to resolve conflict. What do you think causes the most arguments in marriage? We asked various people on the streets what they thought, and here are their answers.
I think most couples have silly fights about absolutely everything. Not one thing in particular, probably everything that there is, they fight about, because you spend a lot of time with someone when you're in a relationship.
Most couples probably argue about money.
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 Finance.
Money.
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 Yeah, I think it's money too. I think most couples argue about money.
And affairs and cheating and going out and sex and things like that.
La jalousie.
Jealousy.
Being selfish. Mostly it's tiny little things. It's rubbish little things like, I haven't done the washing up again. It's my turn to cook, that kind of stuff.
Children, if you have children, sharing responsibility.
Children.
Yeah, with kids you get tired, so you get tired, you get ratty, and if you have a bad day at work you get tired. If she's had a bad day at home, it's just life pressures, I think.
Responsibilities, I guess. Sharing work.
Work, definitely.
Maybe they don't have the same goals.
I think the person who's least stubborn should just always give in. Give in and say if it's a silly fight, it's a silly fight.
Just walk out of it, I suppose. Walk out the house. Go down the pub and then come back.
I prefer to be honest and deal with it and try and deal with it straight away, so it's done and dusted.
As a little piece of advice is never sleep on them.
I smash few plates. I always use those cracked ones. I never would smash a good plate, and then feel better afterwards.
We've been collecting stories from the press around the world about arguments between couples. Here are a few of them.
Apparently, police were called to a house in Georgia, USA, after a woman knocked her husband out with a potato. The pair had started to argue in the kitchen on the morning of Thanksgiving. She told police she hadn't meant to hit her husband.
A man in India has reportedly spent half a century living in a tree after a tiff with his wife. The Mumbai Mirror reported Mr. Parida, aged 83, saying he'd taken to staying in a mango tree after a quarrel over a tiny issue. He moved trees when his first tree was destroyed in a storm, but he's never moved back into his house.
A man in northern Italy who was sentenced to 9 months house arrest for breaching immigration regulations begged a judge to jail him instead because he couldn't stand his wife's nagging. He said, "I need some peace." The local court agreed to his request.
A British couple called Frank and Anita Milford, who've been married for 78 years, revealed the secret of their long marriage. Frank, aged 98, said, "We don't always see eye to eye and have a small argument every day. But that comes and goes. We're always here for each other."
Disagreement is inevitable and normal in every marriage. In fact, it's healthy. Every couple will face conflict. Conflict doesn't mean that we've married the wrong person or that the relationship is doomed to failure. Rather, with the right tools, resolving conflict can strengthen the relationship.
We went on the marriage preparation course before we got married, obviously, and we were all loved up, and everyone was loved up, and it was like, conflict? What's conflict? We're not going to have conflict. No one's having conflict. We love each other. It's brilliant, and so it was fine.
And then 2 years later, we went on the marriage course, and again they talked about conflict, and we thought, we don't really need to listen to this. We've never had an argument. Although, thankfully, we did listen to it and sort of thought, well, we'll just listen to the tools in case we ever have an argument.
Yeah, and they were very helpful when we did have an argument, because they came later.
And I think it tends to be me. I hate conflict and I hate arguments, and And actually anger is something that historically I've always pushed down and tried not to express. And I think we'd managed to do this very well for the first 2 years of marriage and just through the marriage course. And then afterwards, I think probably I actually managed to trust more that it was okay to talk about things and express negative emotions. And after that, we certainly did start to have a few more disagreements or arguments or whatever you'd call them. And that's been healthy.
Why is conflict inevitable? The main reason is we're all different. Our different backgrounds, different desires, different priorities, different personalities means we'll perceive things differently and we won't necessarily always agree.
Added to that, we're all naturally very self-centred. We find it easier to focus on my desires, my opinions and my needs, rather than on those of our husband or wife.
Conflict is destructive when we try to force or manipulate our partner into doing things our way, when we see ourselves as being on opposite sides. Because really, in our marriage, we're on the same side, the same team. It's a bit like doing the three-legged race. At first, when we're tied together, it feels awkward and difficult. Our strides are different lengths and we set off at different times. It's an art to run with someone else and needs lots of practice. You've got to think about the other person. But if you get into a rhythm, if you learn to match your strides to each other, that feeling of running in harmony with someone else is really satisfying.
In marriage, we have to work through problems together, with both of us asking, are there ways that I need to change for the sake of our partnership? That's how we match our strides to each other. So, what's required to work together to resolve conflict effectively?
First of all, we need to express our appreciation of each other on a regular basis. No marriage can survive a lack of respect, a lack of positive, affirming words being spoken to each other. We all need encouragement, but that's not always obvious, even to our partner.
For me as a stay-at-home mom, it is so important to have appreciation. I think a lot of the reason I didn't feel affirmed by James is that he just didn't do it. He didn't tell me how much he appreciated what I did. And even society, I think it's hard because, you know, you're just kind of taught that those who make the big money are more valued. I absolutely adored being home with our children. And I felt it was such a valuable gift. I'm training the next generation, and I was so privileged to be at home with them and watch them grow and be there for their hurts. But when James would come home, it's kind of hard to communicate because he's been at work all day and doing his thing, and I don't think he really wanted to hear too much about, you know, sloppy messes and going to the park and, you know, well, we had to do shopping today and that kind of thing. So it just didn't seem very probably exciting to you. But I needed it. I needed him to say, you know, what you're doing is amazing. No one else can raise our kids like you can. You show love and compassion, and when you don't get it, you just feel very, I just didn't feel valued.
This need for encouragement is just as great for men as for women. We have to make our husband or wife feel like the most important person in the world for us. In that way, we build up their confidence. Mark Twain once said, I can live for 2 months on a sincere compliment. Appreciation is the opposite of criticism. Most couples, when they're going out, tend to say a lot of positive things to each other.
But in marriage, it's all too easy to focus on what irritates us instead. I know for myself, I find it really annoying when Scylla leaves the sink full of dirty water overnight so that the grease has congealed around the edge by the morning.
And it infuriates me that Nicky has a tendency to keep everything, even when it's broken. He says that these things just might come in useful one day. But as far as I'm concerned, it seems like junk, and I'm longing to get rid of it.
From our own experience, we also find that the more we concentrate on the things we like about each other, the more inwardly appreciative we become of each other. Focusing on what we like and admire about our partner needs to be something we practice on a daily basis, a habit we get into.
I remember one man saying to us, I told my wife on our wedding day that I loved her, and I'd let her know if the situation changed. It hasn't, but she complains that I don't tell her about my feelings for her. Well, I'm not surprised she complains.
Professor John Gottman, a psychologist who's been analysing the habits of married couples for over 30 years, says he reckons he's able to tell within the first 5 minutes of listening to and watching a couple whether or not their relationship is in trouble. And he says a key indicator is, are they showing each other appreciation? And his advice to couples is this: by simply reminding yourself of your partner's positive qualities, even as you grapple with each other's flaws, you can prevent a happy marriage from declining.
In more recent years, I particularly try not to take anything for granted, and so I don't drive a car. Don does, and I never get out of the car that he's taken me somewhere where I don't say thank you to him. I don't take that for granted. So I feel it's good to show appreciation for one another.
I think that one of the dangers of being in a long marriage is taking each other for granted. I don't know how many meals Anne has cooked for me in our marriage. I can't work it out now, but it's many hundreds and even thousands. And the danger is that another dinner in front of me, well, that's right. But I don't think I fail ever when I've had a dinner to actually thank Anne, particularly for that dinner. You know, every time, and I mean it. You know, and I think it's good we can slip into a habit of taking a lot of things for granted. For me, because of my childhood, where I got very little affirmation, very little appreciation, it means even more to me. It builds me up. If Anne says you did well there, and great, thank you for doing that. I think it's especially affects me.
We now want you to do an exercise that you'll see in the manual entitled Showing Appreciation. We suggest that you fill in 6 things that you appreciate about your husband or wife. And it may be thanking them for what they do, or it may be telling them how much you value them for who they are. And try and make it a mixture.
When you've both finished, show each other what you've written. And one tip: it's well worth coming up with 6 if you possibly can.
We'd encourage you to look back once in a while to read again what you wrote down about each other in that exercise. When we show our gratitude for each other's positive qualities, we're much more likely to work together as a team.
The next requirement for resolving conflict effectively is to identify and accept our differences. Trying to make our husband or wife think and behave like us, or to fit our image of what we think they should be like, never works.
We can be very different in all sorts of ways, such as how we make decisions. One of us may be more cautious and careful, taking a long time over every decision, while the other makes decisions quickly and easily and doesn't worry about making mistakes.
We are quite different, and we've had to find ways of resolving our differences. One instance that comes to mind is when we're decorating, and I like to just go out and buy the paint and put it on the walls, but Karen?
I like to actually go and see what the options are and come home with a chart and maybe a couple of tester pots and put it on the wall and just see whether I will be able to live with it for a while, whereas Paul just wants to pick up the pot at the first visit and come home and put it on the wall. And how we've really worked on that particular issue is I
ask her 3 months in advance as to what colour she would like and let her ponder on it overnight. And then I know that sort of in December or January time that I'll be ready to paint.
We can be very different in how much planning we like to do. One of us may be very well organised, planning well in advance, while the other likes to be more spontaneous and prefers to go with the flow. That's me. As you heard from our discussion in the last session, I like to keep my options open as long as possible, just in case I come up with a better idea or find a cheaper deal.
To me, that's procrastination. Whereas I prefer to be more organised and know what we're going to do.
We can also be very different in how we restore our energy. For an extrovert, that will include spending time with others. So, on a Friday evening after a hard day's work, an extrovert might think, what an awful day at work. Thank goodness we're going out to see people tonight. An introvert would probably think the exact opposite. And if they're exhausted on a Friday night, they're more likely to look forward to a quiet weekend and may feel very differently about social occasions.
I think our biggest differences are probably in our approach to people and the way that we enjoy relaxing. I'm quite an extrovert, and there's nothing I like more than walking into a room full of strangers and just meeting them for the first time and getting to know them and finding out, a little bit about them.
Whereas that's my idea of a complete nightmare, actually. I like to go to a party where I know everybody and I've known them for 10 years and spend time with them like that. So, yeah, I think that's one of the big differences.
Another difference between the extrovert and introvert is that extroverts tend to think out loud, while introverts like to sort out their thoughts first and then speak.
I'm married to an extrovert. I've had to learn not to react too quickly when Scylla says something to me with great passion and conviction. She's quite likely to change her mind and say the opposite 5 minutes later with equal passion and conviction. As an introvert, I like to work out what I think before speaking. So, if we have a difficult decision, I'll typically go away by myself to think it through and then tell Scylla what I think.
But to me, that's not a discussion, that's just his conclusion. In marriage, we have to learn to accept our varying approaches. With personality differences, one attitude is not better or worse than another, it's just different. A strong marriage is where we see ourselves as a partnership, combining our strengths and helping each other in our weaknesses.
As couples, we're not just different in terms of our personalities. Other things have shaped us and made us who we are. Our upbringing and our parents' attitudes will have affected how we behave and how we think. And we can come into marriage with different values in all sorts of areas.
Often we find that opposites attract. We can be intrigued by and drawn towards someone who has different qualities to ourselves. But then, the very differences that initially attracted us can start to annoy us. So, often it's the small things, our partner's particular ways of doing things, that can start to irritate us.
I think one of the biggest differences and irritations is when I have a shower, I manage to contain the water behind the shower curtain, as you should. And I don't know what Jared does in the bathroom, but you can walk in there and the whole floor is flooded and the mat is soaking wet. And I've just asked him a few times, and I think he's getting it now, that he really needs to mop up the water and then put the soaking wet mat over the heater to dry afterwards. And he is getting better at that.
I am getting better at I remember to put the towel up. I still haven't quite mastered the art of keeping water outside of the shower. That's something I'm still working on. Irritations that sometimes drive me nuts for you, it would be the leaving clothes by the side of the bed. Usually ends up the floor becomes the wardrobe. I've had to learn that constantly nagging and saying pick up your clothes doesn't work. So we've now come to an agreement or understanding that she's not on the side of the bed that you can see from when you're standing in the door in the hallway. So it's not as bad as my side of the bed. So keeping my side of the bed clear is okay.
Very important.
Yeah. An example of a major difference between Scylla and me is in the area of money, as we know it is for many couples. By and large, there are three choices we can make with money. We can save it, spend it, or give it away. Scylla and I have had no problem agreeing on how much and when we should give money away, but with the other two options, we are poles apart. I suppose that I describe myself as a natural saver.
While I'm more of a natural spender. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. That doesn't mean that I'm a compulsive shopper, nor does it mean I enjoy shopping any more than Nikki. It's just that I find it easier to spend money than Nikki does.
In fact, much easier. And that led to a lot of conflict in the early years of our marriage, with me feeling resentful and Scylla feeling rather guilty. But we eventually came to realise it's not that either of us is better with money than the other. It's just that we're better at different things.
Nikki is much better at managing money than me.
And Scylla is much better at using it. 30 years on, I think we've learned how we complement each other. Scylla's certainly helped me not to be overcautious and to use money a lot more freely. As an example of how overcautious I can be, for their weekly pocket money, our children used to have 1 penny for each year of their age. 6pence when they were 6, 8pence when they were 8, and so on. That was quite a while ago, but still, Kirsty, when she was 10, would have had to save up for a whole month to buy even 1 ice cream. Well, eventually, Scylla persuaded me that 10pence was never going to teach our daughter a lot about handling money sensibly. And their pocket money was raised by 1,000% overnight.
Meanwhile, Nikki definitely helps me to keep account and not to overspend. If I was running short of money in the past, I used to bury my head in the sand. I just didn't want to think about it and would often run into debt. Nikki helps me to plan ahead.
Understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses helps us work much better as a team.
You know, the difference in attitudes to money is something which really explodes sometimes in the early years of a marriage. He's from the background where just anything goes and, hey, live today because tomorrow you might be dead. But she's been from a frugal background, you know, and she watches every penny, and it can be really, really kind of difficult, I think. The truth of it is, as the years go by, you have to let each other know how you feel. And normally, one is not right and the other wrong, because it can be really boring to watch every penny, can't it? And really frustrating to see every penny going out of the window. So you have to talk about it. And in truth, there's no right way for every couple. But normally, you get to a stage where you say, look, we've got this amount of money and we ought to try to live within our means. The fascinating thing about debt is it's no respecter of income. So we think, when I've got that rise coming through next month, life's going to be fine. But normally we've spent up to it within a few months. Most people spend about 10% more than they earn. So when couples have a different attitude to money, I recommend they talk about it, sit down, do a budget and agree what you're going to spend on a car, on holidays, on restaurants, on 1,001 different things. And then the others have got the right to say, you stepped over our line. And it's very important they've agreed it together.
If you've never done a budget, you'll find some notes on how to go about it in the back of the marriage book.
This need to appreciate our different strengths and support each other's weaknesses applies to all areas of life. And that's the point of this next exercise, which we've called Recognising Your Differences.
First of all, against the list of issues, each of you put your own and your partner's initial, where you consider you each come on the line between those two extremes.
You'll see the examples for Nikki and myself regarding money. I'm more towards the spending end of the spectrum, while Nikki's closer to the saving end. And punctuality. I like to leave lots of time to catch a plane or a train, whereas Nikki prefers to cut it fine, very fine actually, as he feels getting there early is a waste of time. Now, don't look at what your husband or wife has put until you've both finished. Then discuss where your differences can be a source of strength in your relationship.
We hope you enjoyed that last exercise and were able to laugh at some of your differences. We found that laughing and teasing each other kindly keeps us connected and is a great way of diffusing tension. Maintaining a sense of humour is such an important part of working as a team.
For many couples, when they start going out, laughter is a big part of their relationship. In marriage, continuing to laugh at each other's funny ways of doing things prevents us from taking ourselves too seriously and stops our relationship becoming intense.
Humour is very important. One of the things that attracted me to Eric the most was his sense of humour. And sometimes, if I'm feeling really upset about something, and not just upset for the sake of it, but upset with Eric in particular, and he knows that I have got a point, he will just totally take the wind out of my sails by putting a joke in. One of his favourites is he pretends he's got boxing gloves on, goes, "Want to fight? You want to fight?" And when he does that, I just crack up laughing. I find it so funny. I do, just thinking about it, 'cause we come from Jamaican heritage, and I sort of like translated that into English, and it's not so funny. But in the Jamaican patois, it's, "I fight, you want fight." and it's just funny when he does that. I just crack up. I just completely start laughing. So once I'm laughing, that's it. It's all dampened down, and I either see that what I was that upset about is not that big a deal, or I can approach it from a much calmer frame of mind. The humour is really important to us, isn't it?
It is.
Sometimes we laugh about the kids as well.
I think when June's laughing, I think she's great. I think she looks awesome when she's laughing. So from my point of view, if I keep her laughing, there's no time to argue, is there, really?
Oh, that's what you do.
We want to go on now to look at what is probably the heart of this session, a key skill in marriage for resolving conflict effectively, and that is learn to negotiate. People approach conflict differently. Some try to force their partner to do things their way.
Other people surrender. They may be frightened of disagreements. They may hide, run away, or just do anything to avoid confrontation.
Still other people bargain. They say, "I'll do this if you do that." But that all too easily becomes, "I won't do my bit because you haven't done your bit."
None of these approaches builds closeness or is effective in resolving conflict. However, there is a way that is effective, and that's through negotiation.
Negotiation involves discussing the issue that's causing tension and finding a solution that works for us as a couple. It means seeing, as we said earlier, that really we're on the same side and working together as a team. We're going to run through 6 very practical steps for negotiating areas of conflict effectively. 6 steps that bring peace between us.
The first step is to find the best time. I think we all recognise that there are bad times to try and resolve arguments.
We have our worst arguments when I'm particularly hungry or tired. If I haven't eaten for a while, then blood sugar goes down, and then I'm very irritable and ratty. Or if I haven't had enough sleep, then it, and I know it's coming. So it's, you know, I've worked out saying, actually, Sarah, I haven't eaten for a while, or, you know, I'm quite sleepy. So this is not the time to bring up anything particularly inflammatory or anything that might cause an argument, because, you know, we're going to be going down that road very quickly.
And I think for me, when I'm really stressed, if there's a lot going on at work and I've got a lot in my head, and David starts on something, then I'm sort of full up and find it hard to, that's probably not a good time if I'm feeling stressed. Hormonal, if there are certain times of the month where I might react more than I would normally. But there's no point, David, pointing that out, that it's that time of the month, because it will, whatever the issue is that I'm feeling very strongly about, that will seem very real, and telling me I'm just being hormonal won't help at that moment.
Some other bad times are in front of other people, just before a special occasion, when we're about to leave for work in the morning, or when we've just walked in through the door at the end of a busy day.
But the number one worst time for most couples is late at night. When we're tired, we can so easily get things out of perspective.
Our worst time for an argument would be late at night, when we're both tired and really shouldn't be trying to sort anything out, I think.
Yes, amazingly, Friday night. Quite often we'd build Friday night up in our minds as a time after work for each other. But actually, Friday night we were really tired, and so we'd end up being frustrated, and it'd be a horrible time. So we now make sure that Friday nights we don't try and tackle solving world peace.
In the early days of our marriage, our most futile arguments were always last thing at night. We'd find ourselves totally losing the plot. And then, very helpfully, some friends told us about what they called the 10 o'clock rule. The rule is that if you're having an argument late in the evening, either one of you can call the 10 o'clock rule into play. That means the argument has to be postponed until a better time. Perhaps earlier the next evening or over a cup of coffee at the weekend.
That was such a help for us, and we've often used the 10 o'clock rule over the years. Actually, it's usually Nikki who calls it into play. Of course, waiting for a better time takes self-discipline. I'm naturally more volatile than Nikki, and that does have its healthy side, getting things out into the open. But I've come to realise that it isn't always helpful to let Nikki know straight away when I disagree with him. And learning self-discipline has been a difficult and big part for me of resolving conflict more effectively.
Using the 10 o'clock rule doesn't mean going to bed still angry with each other. The issue may not be resolved, but if either or both of us have said unkind things, we need to apologise to and forgive each other, and reassure each other that our relationship is still okay, even though we haven't yet reached agreement. We'll be talking more about dealing with anger in the next session. So, the first step is to find the best time.
The second step is to identify the issue. Arguments so easily get widened and all sorts of other things get drawn in, so sometimes we can't even remember what it was that we were arguing about in the first place. Identifying and articulating the issue can be the most important part of preventing disagreements escalating.
An analogy that we found very helpful is to imagine that we're on a three-seater sofa with wife at one end and husband at the other, with this contentious issue right in between us, keeping us apart and stopping us from hearing each other properly or seeing each other's perspective. Identifying the issue means taking what's coming between us and putting it out in front of us. Then, as wife and husband, we can move together on the sofa with nothing between us and work together on finding a solution for the issue that's out in front of us.
Being able to speak about any issue that confronts us is one of the things that we gain from the marriage course. You know, sitting together like we are now and putting it out in front is such a great strategy. It really has equipped us to deal with anything that comes.
And there's very, very few issues now that we can't take hold of and run with, especially if we give it the time that it's really deserves.
Yeah. We don't see each other as the enemy anymore.
No.
The third step is to discuss the issue rather than attack each other. If we're to do this, it may well involve some of us having to learn to control our temper. Uncontrolled anger is very destructive and, tragically, can cause people to become physically violent, which almost certainly will destroy marriage. And if you know uncontrolled anger is a problem in your marriage, we would strongly suggest that you seek help.
It's also destructive to hurl accusations at each other in the heat of an argument.
Equally, I guess, in some of our heated moments, or my heated moments anyway, I would use words that I didn't really mean to criticise Jill, and they were an expression of my anger, not really meaning those words, but that wasn't the effect that they had.
Yes, I think we realised that we'd come home and we'd both speak to each other in any way, and not in any way that we'd speak to anybody else, where we'd make a big effort. And it was part of realising that we must appreciate each other and treat each other really well, rather than taking them for granted.
So we now really make a point of being courteous and kind with each other's in the way that we speak. The most important person in your life deserves that, I guess.
The vicar who married Nikki and me gave us a great bit of advice. He said, there are two phrases to avoid using at all costs in marriage. You always and you never. Because when we use one of these phrases, we're labelling each other's character, such as when we say, you never do anything to help, or you always make us late.
A much better way of putting it is to use I statements describing our own feelings. So rather than, you never do anything to help, it's much more productive to say, I'm upset you didn't help me with the clearing up last night.
Or instead of, you always make us late, it's better to say, I don't like leaving for the train so late because it makes me feel really stressed.
Equally important, to avoid attacking or blaming each other, is to be a good listener, as we talked about on session 2. When we're having an argument, we're usually very keen our partner understands our point of view, but we're not quite so keen to understand theirs. Making sure we listen will be especially relevant for us if we know that we're better with words than our husband or wife. A simple but very effective ground rule is, take it in turns to talk.
Listening to each other in an argument or in conflict situations, I think, is crucial. Otherwise, we're just smacking heads without the other one really knowing where the other one's coming from, and it just perpetuates things. Things just go on forever, and we end up telling each other, "You're not listening to me." Rah 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 rah. It's definitely that analogy of sitting on the couch together, facing the problem rather than sitting on the couch having a problem between you. Is definitely that's the way to deal with it.
Yeah, and just giving each other the time to say what you want to say and listen actively and sort of be able to paraphrase each other's thoughts back to each other.
You just feel so listened, and you feel like you've got your point across when you do it that way.
The 4th step is to work out possible solutions. Now, this may sound unrealistic in the middle of a heated discussion, but once you've done the first 3 steps that we've just mentioned, it's much more possible. When we start focusing on the issue, it's amazing how many ideas we can come up with. So, for example, if the conflict is over money, some possible solutions may be you make a detailed annual budget together, or you change who organises the finances.
We used to constantly disagree about money, and we have very different upbringings and values about money. I think you should only spend money on food and sports equipment. That's kind of where I come from. But it was getting to the point where Deborah would want to buy some clothes, and she'd kind of take me out to the shop and kind of be asking me if she should buy these clothes, and I would just say no, and we have these big arguments. It was terrible.
It was terrible, and then I just said, look, I'll take on managing our money, and we created a budget, and it was as simple as that. As soon as we had a budget and as soon as we knew what we were spending our money on, all our disagreements ended.
And we spend less too.
Other possible solutions to a conflict over money could be one or both of you decide to use cash rather than cards, or you agree to sit down once a week to review spending, or perhaps you decide to ask for help from someone who's good with money.
Sometimes it helps to write down a list of possible solutions to see the different possibilities, and we can then refer back to them if necessary.
The 5th step is to decide on the best solution for now. Try it out. See if it works for your marriage. If it works, the issue will stop causing conflict.
One of our best solutions was, without doubt, on a recent holiday that we went to. It was our 25th wedding anniversary, actually, and we went to Barcelona.
Yes, I think we've learned that Brian likes to sort of look at more sort of monuments and the historical side of places, and football and sports, sort of those kind of things. And I like sort of lying on the beach, warm food, restaurants, all those kind of things. So I think in the past we've either tried to go on holidays that suit Brian and then a different holiday that suits me. But it was very nice for our anniversary. We sort of chose Barcelona as a sort of us solution because it has Barcelona Football Club, it has monuments all over the place, churches, everything, which I learnt to enjoy. But also it had nice restaurants, nice beaches, and the sort of things for both of us. So we have learnt we can go on holiday together a bit more successfully and do different things for both of us and both enjoy them.
The 6th and final step is be prepared to re-evaluate if there still seems to be conflict over the issue. Go back to the other possible solutions and try another one. It's very freeing if we both accept that the solution we've tried doesn't need to be set in stone. We can try something different if the first one we came up with isn't working.
Those 6 steps, finding the best time, putting the issue out in front of us, listening to each other's point of view, looking for solutions together, trying one out to see if it works and trying another if it doesn't, have really helped us when there's been tension between us.
It's time now for our feature couple for this session, who are going to talk about their differences and how they deal with them.
We go. My balloon. Quickly. I'll get it for you. All right. You go upstairs. At bedtime, Harry said to Mom, I like the videos, but I like mine.
I'm Henrik.
And I'm Inger. We've been married 11 years.
And we have 2 children, both of them 3 years.
Later, Nan took Harry back. We went on the marriage course 8 years ago now.
We had been married for 3 years at that stage, and things were going pretty well, but we wanted to find a way of making it even better.
One of the sessions that really stood out for us was the session on differences. One could say that we're probably different in almost every area you could come up with.
I like to save my money.
And I like to spend it.
I'm sporty.
And I'm arty.
I'd love to spend holidays on our own.
And I want to socialize with our friends and our family.
I like to read.
And I like to talk.
I like to go to bed really early.
And I want to go to bed at 1 a.m. in the morning.
I do not like to cook a recipe.
And I cook by the book.
And when we argue, I retreat.
And I'm the one who attacks.
Funnily enough, 8 years on since doing the course, we realized that we've become much more similar and the edges have been softened. And I've been known to stay up quite late and talk.
And I cooked a meal without using a recipe. Another thing that we found helpful on that session was finding an us solution. There's one classic example where we were renovating a kitchen.
I like really light birch type cabinets.
And I really wanted antique stained dark wood cabinets.
Which is the worst for me.
And birch was absolutely something I could not consider ever. Should I kind of sacrifice my idea of the dark wood and go for birch even though I hate it? Or do you compromise? Do you do one birch cabinet, one dark stained, one birch, one dark stained? We had to think of something.
So, like good Swedes, we went to IKEA. And there we found a solution that was just us.
As you can see, that this kind of light white painted look that kind of ticked the box for Henrik because they were light, and they ticked the box for me because they had an old feel, old look to them, and that was an amazing moment for us. It's been one of those situations that you can go back to and you can say, we found an us solution then, so surely we can find one again.
The most important realization was that it's not all bad to be different.
I think it was easy in the beginning to look at those differences as dangerous, that they were potentially tearing us apart. And what the course taught us was that differences aren't dangerous. Our differences might mean that, we can complement each other.
But it also means that we need to understand the differences and then try to find solutions that work for both of us.
But I think what we learned about listening to each other, letting the other one explain where they're coming from, that has really been the key in finding a strength in those differences and finding a way for us to resolve issues that pop up between us.
This whole process of resolving conflict through negotiation involves each of us considering how we might need to change. It's no good saying, that's just the way I am, while being critical of our husband or wife. Jesus once said on this subject, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from the other person's eye.
In marriage, our attitude needs to be, we can change ourselves, we can't change each other.
Most husbands and wives want their partners to change in some way, don't they? She says, I wish he was better at DIY. He says, I wish he was sexier. I wish he was stronger with the children. But the problem is, when you try to change somebody, you often try to make them into somebody they just can't be. And when you do that, you miss the person they are. The truth is, you can't really change another person, but you can change yourself. You can say, I am going to stop being sarcastic. I am going to be more positive. I'm going to tell my husband, my wife, I love them every day. And I'm going to change. And because change is dynamic, often that affects the other person as well.
Sometimes couples break up because they think they're incompatible and there's nothing that they can do about it. And that's so sad. We're not incompatible unless we refuse to change, unless we refuse to match our stride to our husband or wife.
But we can only change when we know what matters to each other. Sometimes the real issues are buried under years of unresolved conflict, or we've never told each other about what frustrates and hurts us. We can't assume our partner automatically knows.
We must tell each other about the issues that matter most to us and why they're important to us. Requesting change of each other in marriage is a good thing. Demanding change is harmful.
So much conflict in marriage arises from our subconscious assumptions about the ways things should be done, whether it's the way we parent our children, the way we decorate our house, what sort of holidays we take, or the way we approach money. These assumptions are mainly the result of our different upbringings and the values that we've taken on from our parents, our step-parents, or whoever brought us up. The more aware we are of our own and each other's values, the more allowances we'll make for our different views, and the easier we'll find it to make changes for the sake of our marriage.
My dad was an entrepreneur, businessman, and we had lots of ups and downs. We kept moving house. You know, times are good, we get a nice house. Times are bad, we move into a small apartment. And you know, we always had food on the table and stuff. It was always fine, but boy, it was really up and down. So I've just become a saver and a bit of a worrier about money.
And in my family, my father was a real spender, and he used to really enjoy money. And so I follow in his footsteps.
And then bang, bang, bang.
The next exercise will help you to understand why you each react in certain ways to certain situations which may be causing conflict between you. Nikki and I did this exercise ourselves recently, and it was very revealing.
Actually, we had a big argument. But it helped us to recognise some differences between our fathers that have caused tensions between us over the years. I had a father who was very practical and had an extraordinary gift for mending anything and everything. As a result, I don't worry very much about things breaking, as I think that mending them is a normal part of life. So I was very happy driving around in our old car, even though it was quite likely to break down at any moment.
My dad, on the other hand, had totally different gifts. He wasn't at all practical and had no confidence that he could mend anything. So he always wanted to be sure that the car was in really good working order. And doing this exercise made me realise I've taken on that same value, which is why having an old car that was always breaking down caused a lot of tension and arguments between us.
We had to look for a solution, and after some discussion, we decided the best thing was to change our car for one in much better condition. And life is happier all round, as the thought of going somewhere in the car doesn't make Scylla feel stressed anymore.
We want you to turn in your manuals to the next exercise called Matching Our Strides. And first of all, circle the words or the phrases that best describe your feelings about money and possessions as you grew up. And then add other words or phrases that come to mind. Show each other what you've put, and then after that, agree on the list of values that are most important to you as a couple in your approach to money and possessions. Finally, write down any action points or changes that you'd both like to make.
We know that for some of you it'll take longer to find solutions than you've got time for. So you may have to continue for your homework.
homework, we've put a similar exercise to help you work out your fundamental values regarding other issues that commonly cause conflict, such as how you spend your free time, how you divide up the chores at home, or different models for parenting if you have children.
I think different styles of parenting can really cause conflict in a marriage. It happened in our own marriage, actually, particularly with our testing child. Katie was our first. She was compliant, so no problem there. But then Lloyd came into the world. Lloyd used to wake up every day of his life thinking, how can I drive my mother crazy today? And he'd go to bed worried he'd not made a good job of that task. And I had to watch Diane with him. Before he went to school, she'd say, have you cleaned your teeth? Yes, Mum. Let me smell. Have you washed under your armpits? Yes, Mum. She didn't offer to check that out. And I would say to her, you're always on his back. Leave him alone. She would say, no, I need to be. And you know, the truth of it is, we both needed to learn from each other. I needed to become a little stronger. She needed to choose her battles a bit often, because if you're always on someone's back, they never know what really matters to you. And over the years, we learned that from each other. But the fundamental lesson we learned is you have to present a united front. I remember telling me off one day. She'd sent Lloyd to bed early for something, and I went up and said, oh, I'm sorry, Lloyd. What's your mother done to you now? Come here, let me give you a hug. And she said, Rob, that's not on. You may not agree with me, but we have to present a united front. And I think she was right. Absolutely vital.
We want to speak in this final section about a very important value for us. And that's the difference our shared faith makes in our marriage, including how it affects the way we approach disagreement. Whether or not you share a faith, we hope you'll find some of these principles relevant for you. Often, when there's a lot of tension between us, we need space. And for many people, talking to God provides this.
On a very practical level, there comes a point where you get to the end of yourself in a marriage where the other person's just doing your head in. So you've got somewhere to go, someone else to talk to. For me, that's how it comes across to me.
Yeah.
You know, because you still need your own space, you know, but you're still together even though you've got your own space, but there's somewhere else to go when you think, oh.
I think one of the biggest differences that our faith makes for us is in what we expect from each other. We've seen how some people, when they get married, put unrealistic expectations onto their husband or wife and onto their marriage. They expect their partner will meet all of their needs, but that's a recipe for disappointment. The wife of astronaut Charlie Duke, who led the Apollo 16 mission to the moon, commented on why their marriage very nearly failed. She said, my marriage to Charlie was another attempt to fill the void. Our marriage failed me because I was looking for him to be the perfect husband in the perfect marriage. That was my Cinderella dream.
Expecting our wife or husband to be the ideal partner and to meet all of our needs will cause a marriage to spiral downwards, as in this diagram. Expectations which are not fulfilled lead to us making demands of each other, which then lead to disappointment, because no one human being can meet all these needs. And the disappointment then leads to blame and criticism.
I'd certainly got this picture in my head of what an ideal husband should be, and if Pete didn't measure up to that, he'd know about it rather too frequently.
Yes, and that was very difficult because I did feel that I wasn't good enough at times, and that's been something we've had to work hard over a long period, and it would have been better to realise that damage.
Nikki and I both became Christians after going out for nearly 2 years, and a lot changed as a result.
I think in retrospect, one reason was that previously I'd been looking to our relationship to meet all of my needs. As I started looking to God instead for those needs, it made a big difference. This next diagram is our attempt to show why. It shows us looking first to God for that unconditional love we all crave, for a sense of significance, security, and self-esteem. And then, as those needs are met in God, we find we're able to give more easily to each other.
There was a very obvious time when Lisa was sick for an extended period that I had to look to God for my needs, because Lisa was so sick that I had to go to work, come home, do the housework and the cooking, and then try and lift Lisa's spirits. And the only way I could do that was by asking God for more help and for more love, and then pouring that out on Lisa as he gave it to me.
And it was amazing actually, because I saw the difference. I would see David coming home day after day with just so much to give me, and I just thought, how can you come home and tell me I'm beautiful? How can you come home and tell me that I'm amazing and lovely when I'm lying on the couch looking like death? And he would day after day, and I just thought, that can't come from you.
It didn't.
Yeah.
Nikki and I decided right from the beginning of our marriage that we wanted to pray together as a couple. And we found it's been a great way for us to connect with each other in a meaningful way at the start of each day.
We aim at just a few minutes each morning, and we simply ask each other, what would you like me to pray for you today? It'll be about very personal things, such as something we're worried about, perhaps a difficult decision we have to make, or something to do with one of our children.
Sometimes it's been the same request day after day. When our children were little, I was constantly exhausted, and I found myself asking Nikki to pray that I might have more energy and more patience, and it made such a difference. We found it really changes our perspective on the day when we focus on God.
We did the marriage prep course before we got married, and it definitely highlighted the importance of praying together. And we make sure that the first thing we do in the morning and the last thing we do at night is to pray. And it's not like 2 hours worth of prayer session, but it's
more like 2 minutes.
But it's just a way of, you know, starting the day with God at the centre and ending the day with God in the centre, and hopefully He's still at the centre all the way in between then.
In the morning we probably pray about things that are going to be happening during the day that we know each other's got to face, or things that are happening. And then in the evening it's probably more like thank you for the things that have happened, and reflecting back on what's gone on.
We've found that praying together like this on a regular basis has stopped us taking each other for granted or being upset with each other for too long. We usually read a verse or two from the Bible before thanking God for our marriage, our home, our family, or whatever comes to mind. And then we each say a short prayer for the other.
Sometimes, before we can pray, we've had to say sorry if one of us knows that we've upset the other. And when we've had a disagreement, these few minutes of prayer have often helped us to see more of each other's point of view.
A real prayer time together as a husband and wife is about vulnerability again, and that in itself, if you can pray together, will bring you closer together, because you actually share what's really on your heart when you're talking about, you know, what you want God to answer for you, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of honesty involved, I think, when you pray.
We've certainly had to persevere with praying together over the years. As with our marriage time, it doesn't just happen. We've had to be deliberate about it and plan it into our schedule. We don't manage it every day, but when we do, we experience the difference in our relationship.
Before we end this session, we want to give you the opportunity in the last few minutes to pray for each other if you'd like to, very simply and briefly. What we suggest is that you ask your husband or wife if there's one thing that they're concerned about at the moment. Then, if you're comfortable praying, pray for each other, either aloud or silently, specifically about what they've just told you. If you're not comfortable praying, then we suggest that you express your support for your partner concerning what they've just told you in some other way.
We're going to finish this session now with a prayer, so please stay just as you are. A verse in Psalm 46 says this: God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in times of trouble. Thank you, Lord, that you're our strength, particularly in times of difficulty. We ask that when differences between us cause conflict, you would help us to see each other's point of view and to learn to match our strides to one another. Please help us to appreciate each other more and more, and to make changes in ourselves where we need to for the sake of our marriage. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, that's all for this session. We look forward to seeing you next time when we'll be talking about the power of forgiveness. Goodbye.
Goodbye.